What if history isn't just something we study, but something that's still happening all around us? Picture this. In the year 1776, a group of revolutionaries signed a declaration that would change the world, breaking free from an empire they believed no longer represented them. Fast forward 248 years, and in 2024, another movement rises, echoing those same cries for independence under eerily similar circumstances. This isn't coincidence, it's history whispering to us across the centuries, and it's happening more often than you think. From ancient empires to modern politics, from forgotten inventions to cutting-edge technology, the past doesn't just repeat itself, it leaves fingerprints on our present in ways that will make your spine tingle. Think about the last time you saw a headline and thought, haven't we been here before? That déjà vu isn't just in your mind. The same patterns, the same struggles, even the same mistakes resurface like clockwork, proving that humanity's story is far more connected than we realize. That's exactly what we're uncovering today. 30 uncanny moments where history didn't just inspire the modern world, it echoed through it. We'll travel from the halls of medieval Europe to the Silicon Valley boardrooms, from the strategies of ancient generals to the viral trends of today, revealing how the past isn't just a shadow but a living, breathing force shaping our lives right now. So buckle up, because by the end of this journey, you'll never look at the present the same way again. The past is speaking. Are you ready to listen? Imagine two moments in history, separated by nearly 80 years, where the world watched as towering financial empires crumbled overnight. The first began with the Roaring Twenties, a time of unchecked optimism and reckless speculation until Black Tuesday in October 1929, when the stock market collapsed, wiping out fortunes and plunging the globe into the Great Depression. Banks failed, unemployment soared past 20%, and breadlines stretched for blocks. Fast forward to 2008, and the scene feels hauntingly familiar. Another era of greed and unchecked risk, another catastrophic crash. This time, it was the housing bubble, fueled by risky mortgages and complex financial instruments, that triggered the worst economic disaster since the 1930s. At their core, both crises shared the same fatal flaw, a belief that the good times would never end. In the 20s, people poured money into overvalued stocks, convinced prices would climb forever. In the 2000s, homebuyers and investors alike bet on ever-rising property values, while banks bundled risky loans into ticking time bombs. And when the bubbles burst, the fallout was eerily similar. Ordinary people bore the brunt. Soup kitchens in the 30s became foreclosure auctions in 2008. Desperate families in both eras lost homes, livelihoods, and hope, but perhaps the most striking parallel was how governments responded. Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal in the 30s introduced sweeping reforms, bank regulations, social safety nets, and massive public works projects to jumpstart the economy. Sound familiar? In 2008, the U.S. government bailed out collapsing banks, passed the Dodd-Frank Act to curb reckless Wall Street practices, and launched stimulus packages to revive spending. History didn't just rhyme, it handed policymakers the same playbook. Yet here's the chilling thought: despite all we've learned, the same patterns keep resurfacing. The names change, subprime mortgages instead of margin loans, but human nature stays the same. Greed blinds us to risk, and fear magnifies the crash. The past doesn't just echo, it holds up a mirror showing us who we've always been. The question isn't whether another crisis will come, it's whether we'll finally listen to history's warnings when it does. 7 centuries apart, 2 pandemics gripped the world with the same chilling familiarity. In 1347, the Black Death arrived on European shores aboard merchant ships, its invisible killer Yersinia pestis spreading faster than anyone could comprehend. By the time it faded, nearly half the continent's population lay dead. Then in 2019, a novel coronavirus leaped from a Wuhan market to every corner of the globe, locking down nations and overflowing hospitals within months. Though separated by time and technology, the parallels between these crises reveal how little human behavior changes when faced with an existential threat. Take quarantine, one of humanity's oldest defenses. Medieval Venice, desperate to slow the plague's march, forced arriving sailors to anchor offshore for 40 days, a practice called quarantina, giving us the modern word. Flash forward to 2020 and countries slammed borders shut, cruise ships became floating petri dishes, and households isolated for weeks. The tools evolved: thermal scanners instead of bonfires to burn contaminated goods, but the instinct to separate the sick from the healthy remained unchanged. Misinformation, too, followed a hauntingly similar script. During the Black Death, panic birthed wild theories. Poisoned wells, vengeful deities, or even Jewish communities falsely accused of spreading disease, a lie that fueled violent pogroms. Sound familiar? COVID-19 brought its own wave of rumors, from 5G towers causing infections to bleach as a miracle cure. Social media amplified these myths faster than medieval town criers ever could, proving that fear distorts truth regardless of the century. Yet the most striking echo lies in how both pandemics exposed societal fractures. The plague's devastation shattered feudal systems, empowering laborers who survived to demand better wages, a ripple effect that reshaped economies. COVID-19, too, laid bare inequalities, frontline workers risking infection for poverty wages while the wealthy retreated to home offices. Both crises became mirrors, reflecting who society valued and who it discarded. But here's where the stories diverge. Medieval science offered little beyond leeches and prayer, while 21st century laboratories developed vaccines in record time. Yet even this triumph carried echoes of the past. Just as plague doctors faced suspicion in their beaked masks, modern anti-vax movements rejected life-saving shots. The lesson: science can leap forward, but trust remains fragile, a bridge we're still learning to build across the centuries. What future pandemics await may depend on whether we finally heed history's oldest warning: unity, not division, is our only real cure. 2,000 years ago, the Roman Empire sprawled across 3 continents, held together by an innovation more enduring than its legions' roads. Stretching over 250,000 miles, these stone-paved arteries connected London to Alexandria, Spain to Syria, with a precision that would make modern engineers blush. Today, when you merge onto an interstate or follow a highway's gentle curve, you're riding the ghost of Rome's brilliance. The empire's roads weren't just paths, they were the ancient internet, transmitting soldiers, goods, and ideas at speeds the world had never seen. The engineering secrets behind them were startlingly advanced. Roman surveyors used a tool called a groma to plot straight lines across mountains and marshes, achieving gradients so gradual, never exceeding 8%, that modern trucks could climb them without strain. They layered crushed stone, mortar, and volcanic ash into a concrete-like mix that resisted erosion. Some stretches still intact today sound like a familiar formula. Substitute asphalt for volcanic ash, and you've got the same tiered construction technique used in 21st century highways. Even the camber, the slight arch in the road's surface for drainage, was a Roman invention still replicated in every lane we build. But the real magic lay in their purpose. Rome understood that roads weren't just for marching armies, they were economic accelerators. A shipment of Spanish olive oil could reach Rome's markets in weeks instead of months, while news traveled at the speed of a galloping horse. Compare that to America's interstate highway system, launched in 1956. Just as Roman roads boosted trade from Britain to Egypt, interstates slashed cross-country shipping costs by 40%, fueling suburban growth and national commerce. The empire's cursus publicus, a state-run courier service, mirrors today's logistics giants like FedEx, both relying on seamless road networks to keep civilizations running. Yet the most striking parallel is how both systems exposed societal divides. Roman roads radiated from the capital, privileging cities over rural areas. a pattern echoing in modern, flyover country disparities. And just as toll stations funded upkeep on ancient highways, today's gas taxes strain under inflation, leaving infrastructure crumbling in a cycle Rome would recognize too well. The lesson: connectivity has always been power. Whether it's a legion resupplying on via a pier or a semi-truck hauling Amazon packages, the roads beneath us don't just carry traffic, they shape empires. In 1692, a wave of terror swept through Salem, Massachusetts, as neighbors turned on neighbors with accusations that could mean life or death. "She's a witch" became the chilling cry that tore apart the community, leading to 20 executions, 19 hanged, 1 pressed to death with stones. Fast forward 330 years, and the stakes may seem lower, but the mechanics remain eerily familiar. Replace the gallows with a hashtag, the spectral evidence with viral tweets, and you've got modern cancel culture, another system where public opinion can condemn with little evidence and even less mercy. Consider the accusations themselves. In Salem, hysterical young girls pointed fingers based on dreams or grudges, their claims enough to spark trials. Today, a single out-of-context tweet or decade-old photo can trigger a digital mob, careers crumbling before facts surface. Both systems thrive on fear of the supernatural in Salem, of social ostracism today, and both punish not just actions but perceived thoughts. When Bridget Bishop was hanged as Salem's first witch, her real crime was being an outspoken widow who didn't conform. Centuries later, the same pattern plays out when someone's old jokes resurface, and the internet demands their head for violating newly shifted norms. The role of authority figures deepens the parallel. Puritan ministers like Cotton Mather stoked Salem's flames with sermons about Satan's infiltration. Now, influencers and media personalities amplify outrage, their retweets serving as modern-day sermons rallying the faithful. In both eras, once the accusation gains momentum, due process crumbles. Salem's courts accepted spectral evidence, visions only the accuser could see. Just as Twitter threads often substitute screenshots for testimony, mob justice overriding presumption of innocence. Yet the most haunting similarity lies in the psychology. Historians note how Salem's accusers projected their own repressed sins onto others, accusing neighbors of the very lust or greed they feared in themselves. Social media often mirrors this, with the loudest critics exposing their own insecurities through their targets. And just as Salem's panic eventually burned out when the elite began facing accusations, cancel culture's fervor wanes when high-profile figures fight back, proving the balance of power still dictates who gets spared. But here's where hope flickers. Salem's tragedy birthed reforms, from banning spectral evidence to compensating victims' families. Today, some platforms are introducing appeal systems or context warnings, tiny steps toward digital redemption. The lesson isn't that calling out wrongdoing is bad, it's that justice requires more than fear-fueled hunts. Whether in a 17th century courtroom or a trending topic, the line between accountability and persecution remains perilously thin. History's warning is clear. When we let fear write the rules, we all risk becoming the next witch. The clatter of mechanical looms in 18th century England announced a revolution that would tear society apart and stitch it back together in an entirely new shape. Factories rose like temples to progress, spewing smoke over cities that swelled with displaced farmers seeking work. 2 centuries later, another seismic shift began, not with steam but with silicon. The digital revolution didn't just change how we work. It dissolved the very idea of workplaces, turning bedrooms into offices and smartphones into factories. Yet beneath the surface, these twin upheavals share a DNA strand of disruption so similar, it's uncanny. Start with the labor upheaval. When textile machines replaced hand weavers in the early 1800s, skilled artisans found their lifetimes of training suddenly worthless. Just as travel agents and file clerks watched algorithms erase their roles in the 21st century. The Luddites smashing frames in protest weren't just technophobes, they were desperate workers demanding a seat at the table, their modern counterparts. Gig economy drivers striking against app algorithms, or writers picketing studios over AI scripts. The tools changed, but the fear remains identical, being rendered obsolete by progress. Economic inequality followed the same script both times. Industrial barons like Carnegie and Rockefeller amassed fortunes while child laborers toiled in mills, mirrored today by tech billionaires launching rockets as delivery drivers struggle for benefits. The gulf between winners and losers widened so dramatically that Victorian reformers coined a term for it, the two nations. Now we call it the digital divide, but the divide itself is as old as progress. Entire towns withered when factories moved. Now shopping malls stand empty thanks to e-commerce. History's lesson: every revolution creates deserts and oases in the same breath. Daily life transformed just as radically. The steam engine compressed travel from days to hours, shrinking the world, a feat the internet would replicate by making continents vanish with a click. Industrialization standardized time zones and the 9-to-5 workday. Digital culture shattered those very concepts with endless scrolling and remote work's eternal on switch. Even resistance echoes across the ages. Romantic poets like Wordsworth mourned nature's loss as smokestacks rose, just as modern movements decry screen addiction and demand digital detoxes. Yet here's the twist that history whispers: disruption always births unexpected beauty. The Industrial Revolution gave us public libraries and weekends. The digital age delivered open-source knowledge and global classrooms. Both began with chaos but forced societies to imagine fairer futures. The real parallel isn't just the pain of change, it's our stubborn, recurring hope that this time we'll harness progress more wisely. The machines keep changing, but humanity's dance with them stays hauntingly familiar. The roar of the 1920s wasn't just jazz and flappers. It was the sound of smugglers revving boat engines under cover of darkness, ferrying illegal liquor to thirsty speakeasies. Prohibition, America's grand experiment to outlaw alcohol, didn't just fail. It unleashed a shadow economy so powerful it corrupted entire cities. Now, fast forward 50 years, swap whiskey for weed, and you've got the war on drugs, another moral crusade that followed the same disastrous blueprint. Both campaigns promised to purify society, yet somehow left it dirtier than before. Take the rise of black markets. When the 18th Amendment banned alcohol in 1920, it didn't stop drinking. It just handed the business to gangsters like Al Capone, who built empires on bootlegging. By 1929, Capone's Chicago outfit was pulling in $60 million a year, equivalent to nearly $1 billion today. Sound familiar? The drug war created its own kingpins. Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel was clearing $22 billion annually at its peak, all while prohibition-style violence turned streets into war zones. In both eras, banning a substance didn't eliminate demand. It simply made criminals obscenely rich. Law enforcement strategies mirrored each other with eerie precision. Prohibition agents famously smashed barrels of confiscated liquor in public spectacles, a tactic echoed decades later when DARE officers staged schoolyard displays of burning seized drugs. Neither approach made a dent in supply. Worse, both campaigns bred systemic corruption. Cops and politicians took bribes to look the other way during Prohibition. During the drug war, entire police departments were caught smuggling narcotics themselves. The lesson: when you declare war on human desire, the collateral damage often includes the very institutions meant to protect us. But the cruelest parallel lies in who paid the price. Prohibition targeted immigrant communities. German brewers and Italian winemakers saw their livelihoods criminalized overnight. The drug war, meanwhile, disproportionately jailed Black and Latino Americans for nonviolent offenses, despite similar usage rates across races. Both movements claimed moral high grounds while deepening societal fractures. Temperance activists painted alcohol as the root of domestic violence. Drug war proponents demonized crack cocaine as a societal poison. Yet in vilifying substances, both obscured the real issues: poverty, inequality, lack of opportunity, that fuel substance abuse in the first place. Perhaps the most tragic echo is the unintended consequences. Prohibition normalized reckless drinking, hoarding limited liquor, led to higher proof, dangerous batches, and birthed organized crime syndicates that outlasted the ban. The drug war, meanwhile, overcrowded prisons with non-violent offenders and spurred a deadly opioid crisis as patients denied painkillers turned to heroin. Both campaigns created the very problems they sought to solve. Yet here's where the stories diverge and offer hope. Prohibition's spectacular collapse led to its repeal in just 13 years, proving even deeply entrenched policies can fall when public opinion shifts. The drug war, by contrast, has limped on for 50, though cracks are finally showing. States legalizing cannabis are witnessing plummeting teen use and booming tax revenues, a stark rebuke to scare tactics. History's verdict is clear. Prohibitionist policies don't eradicate vices, they militarize them. The real solution isn't control, but compassion, treating addiction as a health crisis, not a crime. After a century of failed wars, perhaps we're finally ready to listen. The Roman Empire didn't collapse in a day. It crumbled over centuries, buckling under problems that sound eerily familiar to anyone watching modern superpowers today. At its height, Rome controlled 2.5 million square miles, from the rainy British Isles to the scorching sands of Egypt. But by the 4th century, the empire was straining at the seams, its legions stretched thin across borders too vast to defend. Historians call it imperial overstretch, a phrase that feels uncomfortably relevant as modern nations pour trillions into global military bases and overseas interventions while infrastructure crumbles at home. Internal decay accelerated Rome's fall just as much as external threats. The empire's elite grew obsessed with luxury and status, their villas dripping with imported silk and spices, while ordinary citizens faced bread shortages and inflation. Corruption became systemic. Provincial governors bought their positions to exploit locals, while tax evasion by the wealthy drained public coffers. Fast forward to today, and the parallels are jarring. When a single hedge fund manager pays a lower tax rate than a school teacher, or when corporate lobbyists draft legislation favoring their industries, we're watching Rome's playbook unfold again. The warning buried in this history isn't just about inequality, it's about how societies rot from within when the powerful prioritize self-interest over collective survival. Then came the barbarians, not mindless hordes, but organized groups Rome had underestimated for too long. The Visigoths, who sacked Rome in 410, were actually former allies, pushed into rebellion after being mistreated and denied promised land. This pattern echoes in modern geopolitics, where short-sighted foreign policies often create tomorrow's adversaries. The United States arming Afghan mujahideen against the Soviets, only to face blowback decades later, mirrors Rome's failed client-state strategies. Empires rarely fall to random invaders. They collapse when their own decisions turn peripheral players into existential threats. Economic fragility sealed Rome's fate. Constant wars drained the treasury, leading to currency debasement. Silver coins were diluted with cheaper metals until they became practically worthless. Citizens lost faith in money just as modern economies grapple with inflation and unsustainable debt. The difference: Rome didn't have central banks or quantitative easing, but the root issue was identical: an empire living beyond its means, papering over cracks until the whole structure gave way. Yet here's the twist that history whispers: decline isn't inevitable. Byzantium, Rome's eastern half, thrived for another 1,000 years by adapting, streamlining bureaucracy, innovating militarily, and leveraging trade. Their survival suggests a path for modern superpowers. Resilience lies not in clinging to obsolete dominance, but in reinvention. when a 19th-century British statesman warned that great nations fall from the same height they rose from. He captured the paradox of empire. The very strengths that build power expansion, cultural confidence, economic might can blind rulers to their own vulnerabilities until it's too late. The question isn't whether today's superpowers will face Rome's challenges, but whether they'll recognize them in time. In 1848, a carpenter named James Marshall spotted something glittering in a California river. Flecks of gold that would ignite the largest mass migration in American history. Within a year, 300,000 fortune seekers descended on the West Coast, convinced they'd strike it rich. Flip the calendar forward 170 years, and the same fever gripped the world, not with pickaxes and pans, but with blockchain wallets and moon memes. The gold rush and cryptocurrency booms might seem worlds apart, but they share the same restless energy, the same mix of hope and recklessness that defines every get-rich-quick frenzy in human history. Both movements thrived on stories of overnight millionaires. In California, prospectors whispered about the 49ers who pulled nuggets the size of potatoes from the American river. Fast forward to 2017, and headlines screamed about Bitcoin whales turning spare change investments into mansions. The psychology was identical: ordinary people, seduced by the idea that luck, not labor, could vault them into wealth. But here's the brutal truth both eras reveal: for every winner, there were countless losers. Gold rush miners bankrupted themselves buying overpriced shovels and claims picked clean by early arrivals. Crypto investors, too, poured savings into altcoins that plummeted 99% when hype faded. The real money wasn't in the gold or the tokens. It was in selling the dream, whether through 19th century supply stores or 21st century trading apps. The parallels deepen when you examine the infrastructure. Gold rush towns like San Francisco exploded from sleepy outposts into chaotic metropolises, their streets lined with saloons and swindlers. Crypto had its own boom towns, online forums and Discord channels where self-proclaimed gurus peddled dubious advice for Lambo money. Both ecosystems rewarded hustlers over purists. Levi Strauss made his fortune selling durable jeans to miners, not mining itself. Similarly, the biggest crypto winners weren't hodlers, they were exchange founders and NFT artists cashing in on the mania. Yet the starkest contrast lies in what was being chased. Gold was tangible, its value rooted in scarcity and industrial use. Cryptocurrencies, by design, were speculative, their worth dictated purely by collective belief. A gold nugget could be melted into jewelry or coins. A Bitcoin exists only as code. But this distinction didn't stop either rush from inflating epic bubbles. In 1855, an ounce of gold bought half a month's wages in San Francisco. In 2021, a single Dogecoin created as a joke briefly hit 73 cents, turning tweets into trillion-dollar market swings. What connects these rushes across centuries isn't just greed. It's the human tendency to confuse momentum with merit. Prospectors mistook gold's glitter for guaranteed wealth, just as crypto traders mistook viral hype for intrinsic value. And when reality hit, the aftermath looked strikingly similar. Ghost towns littered the California hills, abandoned by miners who'd moved on to the next rumored strike. Crypto winters, too, left abandoned projects and drained wallets in their wake. But here's the twist: both frenzies, for all their chaos, left lasting legacies. The gold rush built railroads and cities, reshaping a continent. Crypto, despite its crashes, forced mainstream finance to grapple with decentralization and digital assets. The lesson isn't that speculative manias are foolish, it's that they're inevitable. As long as people dream of shortcuts to prosperity, history will keep serving up new versions of the same story, dressed in the costume of the age. The tools change, but the rush remains. The streets of Paris in 1789 echoed with a cry that would ripple through history: liberty, equality, fraternity. The French Revolution wasn't just a revolt against a king. It was a volcanic eruption of pent-up rage against an entire system. Aristocrats who'd never worked a day in their lives lounged in Versailles while peasants starved, their bread literally taxed into unaffordability. Now fast forward to the 21st century, and you'll hear the same fury in protest chants from Wall Street to Warsaw. The players have changed, billionaires replace dukes, think tanks stand in for royal courts, but the script remains uncomfortably familiar. Economic inequality was the tinderbox in both eras. Pre-revolutionary France saw the top 1% clergy and nobles owning 40% of the land while paying almost no taxes. Today, the world's richest 1% hoards nearly half the global wealth, with corporations often paying lower effective tax rates than their secretaries. The parallels don't stop there. Just as French peasants faced back-breaking grain taxes, modern workers watch housing and healthcare costs swallow paychecks while shareholder profits soar. And just as Marie Antoinette allegedly quipped, "Let them eat cake," about the hungry masses, today's elites dismiss struggles with tone-deaf advice like cancel your Netflix subscription to afford homes. Distrust in institutions became the accelerant. By 1789, the French monarchy was drowning in debt from endless wars and luxury spending, its legitimacy crumbling like stale baguettes. Sound familiar? Modern governments face eerily similar crises: ballooning national debts, endless foreign conflicts, and headlines about officials trading stocks on insider information. The Revolution's pamphleteers, scribbling furious critiques of royal excess, would feel right at home on Twitter today, where threads dissect every corporate subsidy and billionaire space race. Then came the violence, the grim parallel no one wants to acknowledge. The Revolution's guillotines weren't just about removing heads, they were brutal theater, a spectacle to shatter the myth of elite invincibility. While modern populism hasn't yet resurrected the tumbrils, the same undercurrents pulse through January 6th insurrections and Yellow Vest riots. When people feel the system is rigged, symbolic targets, whether Bastilles or capitals, become lightning rods for rage. Yet here's where history whispers a warning France missed. Revolutions often devour their own. The Committee of Public Safety's paranoia birthed the Reign of Terror, where former revolutionaries faced the blade alongside aristocrats. Modern populist movements risk similar self-destruction when outrage outpaces vision. The fiery rhetoric that topples corrupt systems rarely builds stable ones, a lesson visible in nations where anti-elite revolts birthed strongmen worse than the oligarchs they replaced. But buried in this dark mirror is a glimmer of hope. The revolution's ideals, equal rights, meritocracy, accountable government, outlasted its bloodshed to shape democracies worldwide. Today's movements, for all their flaws, keep those ideals alive by forcing conversations about wealth gaps and corporate power. The real lesson isn't that upheaval is futile, it's that lasting change requires more than tearing down. It demands building something better on the rubble. The past doesn't just warn us about the dangers of inequality, it dares us to imagine solutions before the guillotines roll out again. A lone camel train winding through the Taklamakan Desert in the year 500 might seem worlds apart from a drone delivering packages in 2024, but both are threads in the same vast tapestry of human commerce. The original Silk Road wasn't a single path but a sprawling web of trade routes linking Chang'an to Rome, where spices, silks, and ideas flowed as freely as gold. Today's digital marketplaces, Amazon, Alibaba, eBay, are the modern incarnation of those ancient pathways, moving goods not on hoof and sail, but through fiber optic cables and algorithmic recommendations. Yet beneath the surface, the heartbeat of trade remains unchanged, connecting strangers across impossible distances to mutual profit. The logistics of these networks reveal startling parallels. Silk Road merchants faced bandits, shifting alliances, and unpredictable weather hazards that forced them to diversify routes and form caravanserais, fortified inns where traders could rest and regroup. Modern e-commerce navigates its own obstacles: cyber attacks, supply chain disruptions, and tariff wars. Amazon's fulfillment centers, with their militarized efficiency, are the caravanserais of our age, way stations where goods pause before the final leg of their journey. Even the concept of marketplaces echoes across millennia. Samarkand's bustling bazaars, where haggling determined the value of Persian carpets, find their counterpart in eBay's auction system, where bids replace shouted negotiations but the thrill of the deal remains identical. What truly united these systems, though, was their role as cultural conduits. Silk Road traders didn't just carry silk and jade. They transported Buddhism from India to China, Greek art to Central Asia, and paper-making technology westward. The internet, too, is a cultural blender. K-pop conquers global charts via YouTube, TikTok recipes fuse Korean and Mexican flavors, and anime aesthetics shape Hollywood blockbusters. Both networks proved that commerce is never just about goods. It's about the invisible cargo of ideas riding alongside them. Yet the speed of this exchange has warped beyond recognition. Where a Silk Road merchant might take years to complete a round trip between Antioch and Xi'an, a Shopify store owner in Nairobi can now sell to Oslo in milliseconds. This velocity has rewritten the rules of influence. Ancient trade slowly transformed languages. The word sugar traces back to Sanskrit sarkara, carried west by Arab traders. Today, internet slang spawns worldwide in weeks, with Gen Zers from Jakarta to Rio using the same viral phrases. The scale, too, is mind-bending. The Silk Road moved perhaps thousands of tons of goods annually. Alibaba handles that volume before lunch. But here's where the comparison turns cautionary. The Silk Road collapsed when empires fragmented and routes grew unsafe, a reminder that globalization isn't irreversible. Today's e-commerce giants face their own existential threats: data localization laws, platform fragmentation, and a growing backlash against tech monopolies. History whispers that no trade network, however dominant, is immune to unraveling. Yet it also offers hope. Just as the Silk Road's demise birthed new maritime routes, the next trade revolution may already be brewing in blockchain ledgers or decentralized marketplaces. The goods change, the speeds accelerate, but humanity's hunger for connection and profit remains our oldest constant. The Titanic's maiden voyage in 1912 was meant to be a triumph of human ingenuity, a floating palace boasting watertight compartments and doors that sealed with the turn of a lever. Newspapers called her practically unsinkable, a phrase that would haunt history. That same year, 1,000 miles away, engineers at the White Star Line's rival, Cunard, were quietly reinforcing their ships with double hulls and additional lifeboats. They'd studied maritime disasters and learned a sobering truth: no ship is invincible. The Titanic story isn't just about hubris, it's about how easily lessons fade when confidence drowns out caution. And if you think we've moved beyond such folly, consider the Boeing 737 MAX, another marvel of modern engineering grounded by fatal flaws its creators swore couldn't exist. The parallels between these disasters start with their origins in boardrooms, not blueprints. Titanic's builders, racing to dominate the transatlantic luxury market, prioritized grandeur over practicality, reducing lifeboat capacity to keep decks uncluttered, dismissing iceberg warnings to maintain speed records. Boeing, similarly pressured by Airbus's competition, rushed the 737 MAX to market, downplaying the risks of its new flight control system. Both tragedies reveal how corporate rivalry can eclipse basic safety calculus. The MAX's Macaws software, designed to automatically push the plane's nose down if sensors detected a stall, became a single point of failure, just like Titanic's reliance on those supposedly fail-proof bulkheads. In both cases, systems intended as backups became liabilities when real-world conditions exposed flaws theory hadn't anticipated. Complacency compounded these risks. Titanic's crew lacked training for evacuation scenarios, assuming the ship itself was their life raft. Boeing, meanwhile, assumed pilots could override McCaw's malfunctions, until investigations revealed most weren't even told the system existed until after crashes killed 346 people. The chilling similarity: both organizations treated human error as the backup plan rather than the inevitability it always is. After Titanic sank, naval architect Edward Wilding admitted in hearings that the unsinkable claim had referred only to a specific set of hypothetical collisions, not the gruesome reality of a 300-foot gash from an iceberg. Boeing's engineers, too, had tested McCaw's against textbook scenarios, not the sensor failures that doomed Lion Air Flight 610 and Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302. Regulatory capture deepened the tragedy in both eras. The British Board of Trade in 1912 let Titanic sail with lifeboats for only half its passengers because outdated rules based capacity on ship tonnage, not human lives. A century later, the FAA delegated much of the MAX's safety certification to Boeing itself, a practice called self-regulation that critics likened to letting students grade their own exams. The result: a U.S. House report found Boeing withheld crucial information from regulators, just as White Star Line had downplayed Titanic's near collision during sea trials. When profit and oversight share a bed, safety often gets left out in the cold. Yet the most haunting parallel lies in the aftermath. Titanic spurred sweeping reforms: the International Ice Patrol, mandatory lifeboat drills, 24-hour radio watch. The MAX crashes led to cockpit software redesigns and stricter pilot training, but only after preventable deaths. History's lesson isn't that we fail to learn, it's that we keep relearning the same lessons at catastrophic cost. Every generation seems destined to rediscover that no technology, however advanced, is immune to human arrogance. The real question isn't whether another Titanic or MAX lurks in our future. It's whether we'll heed the warnings before the next unsinkable claim meets its iceberg. The Great Library of Alexandria wasn't just a building. It was the beating heart of ancient knowledge, a lighthouse of human thought where 500,000 scrolls held everything from Greek tragedies to Egyptian medical texts. Then, around 48 BC, flames engulfed its halls, and centuries of accumulated wisdom vanished in smoke. Fast forward to 2021, when a coding error at Facebook temporarily wiped out petabytes of user data, photos, messages, entire digital lives in an instant. The platforms and storage methods have changed, but the vulnerability remains the same. Human knowledge, whether etched on papyrus or encoded in silicon, is always one disaster away from oblivion. Consider the scale of what was lost in Alexandria. The library's collections included Aristarchus's writings arguing the Earth orbited the Sun, a theory forgotten for 15 centuries until Copernicus rediscovered it. Eratosthenes calculated the planet's circumference there with astonishing accuracy, yet his methods had to be reinvented later. This wasn't just a storage failure, it was an intellectual blackout that set civilization back generations. Now imagine a modern parallel. If a solar flare or cyber attack erased today's cloud servers, we wouldn't just lose cat videos. Entire fields of research, climate data, genomic sequences, AI training models could blink out of existence, forcing future scientists to retread paths we'd already mapped. The methods of preservation reveal another eerie echo across time. Alexandria's librarians didn't just hoard scrolls, they curated, copied, and translated them, creating backups in a decentralized network of temples and scholars' homes, an ancient version of RAID storage. Today's digital archivists employ similar strategies. The Internet Archive's Wayback Machine crawls the web like a team of scribes, saving snapshots of pages before they vanish. Projects like GitHub's Arctic Code Vault bury open-source software in a Norwegian mineshaft, safeguarding code against apocalypse beneath permafrost. Even blockchain technology, with its distributed ledgers, mirrors Alexandria's ethos. redundancy is the only real insurance against loss, yet the threats have multiplied alongside our tools. Fire once posed the greatest danger to knowledge. Now, obsolescence might be deadlier. Scrolls, at least, could be read by anyone who knew the language. Try accessing a floppy disk from 1990 without specialized hardware, or opening a decades-old WordPerfect file with modern software. Digital decay isn't always dramatic. It's the slow rot of file formats becoming unreadable, URLs returning 404 errors, platforms shutting down without warning. The average web page now lasts about 100 days before vanishing or changing beyond recognition. Compared to clay tablets surviving millennia, our most advanced storage methods are shockingly fragile. Perhaps the deepest parallel lies in the psychology of preservation. The librarians of Alexandria believed they were building a fortress for eternity, just as Silicon Valley touts the cloud as forever storage. Both eras underestimated the required vigilance. Maintaining digital archives demands constant energy. Server farms consume 2% of global electricity, a modern-day equivalent to the slaves and scribes who once recopied fading manuscripts. And when funding dries up, the results are identical. The collapse of the short-lived Google+ deleted an exabyte of user posts, just as medieval monasteries' abandonment led to priceless manuscripts being repurposed as bookbinding scraps or kindling. But there's hope in the shadows of these losses. After Alexandria's destruction, fragments of its collection survived in Baghdad, Constantinople, and Cordoba, proof that no single point of failure can erase human curiosity entirely. Today, initiatives like the Long Now Foundation's Rosetta project etch linguistic data onto nickel disks designed to last 2,000 years, while Norway's Svalbard Global Seed Vault preserves crop diversity inside an Arctic mountain. The lesson isn't that preservation is impossible, it's that it must be intentional, distributed, and humble. Knowledge isn't lost when storage fails, it's lost when we stop believing it could. Black blizzards, that's what they called the towering walls of dust that swallowed farms whole during the 1930s, stripping topsoil down to bare rock and choking the lungs of anyone caught outside. The Dust Bowl wasn't just bad weather. It was ecological collapse, forcing 2.5 million people to abandon the Great Plains in the largest climate-driven migration in U.S. history. Their story, immortalized in Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, feels ripped from today's headlines as rising sea levels and megadroughts displace millions worldwide. The faces and places may change, but the cycle remains hauntingly familiar. When the land dies, people follow. Look at the causes and the parallels tighten like a noose. The Dust Bowl sprang from a perfect storm of over-farming and drought. Homesteaders plowed under native grasslands that had held soil in place for millennia, then watched as years of scant rain turned their fields to powder. Today, it's not just plows but pipelines and palm oil plantations driving environmental ruin. In Central America's dry corridor, where coffee farmers flee failed harvests, or the Sahel, where desertification swallows villages, the same equation repeats. Human activity pushes ecosystems past their breaking point, and suddenly, entire regions become uninhabitable. The Okies piling into jalopies bound for California mirror Syrian families crossing the Mediterranean, or Bangladeshis crowding into Dhaka slums as monsoons drown their ancestral lands. Migration routes then and now trace eerily similar arcs of desperation. Route 66 in the 30s became a river of Model Ts packed with mattresses and children, all seeking work in a West that often greeted them with "No Okies Allowed" signs. Modern climate migrants face their own versions of this hostility. Walls along the U.S. Mexico border, razor wire in Greece, or hostile environment policies in the UK designed to deter those fleeing unlivable conditions. Both eras reveal a cruel irony. The people least responsible for ecological disaster bear its heaviest consequences. Dust Bowl farmers had been encouraged by government homesteading acts to settle marginal land. Today's climate refugees often come from nations with minuscule carbon footprints compared to the industrialized giants now slamming doors in their faces. Yet the most unsettling parallel lies in how both crises expose the fragility of prosperity. The Jode family in the Grapes of Wrath weren't lazy or unprepared, they were solidly middle class by Dust Bowl standards until the land itself betrayed them. Modern climate displacement similarly upends lives with brutal speed. A Mauritanian herder who loses his flock to drought or a Floridian whose mortgage dissolves under rising floodwaters both learn the same hard lesson. Civilization's comforts vanish fast when nature shifts the rules. But here's where history offers a sliver of hope. The Dust Bowl spurred revolutionary changes. The Soil Conservation Service taught farmers terracing and crop rotation, while the New Deal planted shelter belts of trees to anchor soil. These reforms didn't just stop the bleeding, they made the land more resilient. Today's climate solutions, from regenerative agriculture to coastal wetland restoration, prove we can still course correct. The difference: time. The Dust Bowl unfolded over a decade. Today's climate disruptions accelerate exponentially. The Oki's story warns us, by the time the dust storms roll in, it's already too late for half measures. Survival demands we listen to the past's whispers before they become screams. The space race of the 1950s and 60s wasn't just about planting flags on the moon. It was a high-stakes chess match where every rocket launch carried the weight of ideological victory. When Sputnik beeped ominously overhead in 1957, America didn't just hear a satellite, they heard a wake-up call that the Soviets might dominate the heavens, and by extension, the Earth. Fast forward to today, and the battlefield hasn't vanished, it's just swapped steel for silicon. The same superpower rivalry that once played out in missile silos and lunar landings now unfolds in server farms and algorithm labs, with artificial intelligence as the new atomic bomb. Consider how the playbooks mirror each other. The original space race saw governments pouring unimaginable resources into technological leaps. NASA, a budget at its peak, consumed 4.4% of the entire U.S. federal spending. Today, the U.S. and China are locked in a similar arms race, but instead of Saturn V rockets, they're stockpiling data and talent. China's 2030 AI dominance plan mirrors Soviet 5-year plans for space supremacy, while America's CHIPS Act funnels billions into domestic semiconductor production like a modern-day Manhattan Project. The stakes feel just as existential. Whoever masters AI could rewrite the rules of economics, warfare, and global influence overnight. Yet the differences reveal just how much the world has shifted. During the Cold War, progress was measured in tangible milestones: Yuri Gagarin's orbit, Neil Armstrong's footprint. Today's tech race is invisible, fought in lines of code and neural networks whose capabilities and dangers even experts struggle to predict. A rocket's trajectory could be calculated. An AI's decision-making process often operates as a black box. And when nuclear weapons required rare uranium and massive infrastructure, AI can be developed anywhere with enough computing power and brains. A democratization of threat that keeps defense strategists up at night. The unintended consequences also follow a familiar arc. The space race gave us satellite communications, MRI machines, and cordless tools, spin-off technologies that transformed civilian life. AI's collateral innovations are already reshaping medicine, education, and art, even as its military applications spark ethical firestorms. Here's where history offers a warning: the same competition that accelerates progress can also cut corners. The Soviet space program's relentless pace led to the Soyuz 11 disaster, where 3 cosmonauts suffocated because a valve burst during re-entry. Rushed AI deployments risk their own catastrophes: algorithmic biases that amplify discrimination, autonomous weapons that misfire, or social media manipulation tools that destabilize democracies. What makes this new rivalry even more volatile is the role of private players. Elon Musk's SpaceX now handles missions once reserved for NASA, while companies like OpenAI and DeepMind advance AI capabilities faster than many governments can regulate. This blurring of lines between corporate and national interests would have baffled Cold War planners. Imagine if Werner von Braun had answered to shareholders instead of the Pentagon. Yet it's this very unpredictability that makes the modern tech race so precarious. A startup's breakthrough or a leaked model could shift the balance of power before legislatures even convene a hearing. The chilling takeaway: deterrence theory kept nukes in silos because mutually assured destruction made launching them unthinkable. But AI lacks those guardrails. There's no equivalent of a red phone hotline when algorithms misbehave. The original space race ended with handshakes in orbit and joint missions. Whether tech rivals can find similar off-ramps remains an open question. One thing, though, is certain. When future historians look back, they may see our current AI debates not as hype, but as the opening moves of a Cold War sequel, one where the fallout isn't radiation but obsolescence. When Johannes Gutenberg fired up his printing press around 1440, he didn't just ink parchment, he ignited an explosion that would shatter the medieval world's information monopoly. Before movable type, books were painstakingly copied by monks, their contents controlled by the church and aristocracy. A single Bible cost roughly what a clerk earned in 3 years. Then came Gutenberg's machine, slashing production time from months to days and prices from fortunes to florins. Fast forward to 2004, when a Harvard sophomore named Mark Zuckerberg launched a dorm room project called the Facebook and unwittingly became the Gutenberg of our age. Both inventions promised to democratize knowledge, yet both also unleashed the same double-edged sword. Information without gatekeepers means truth and lies spread at identical speeds. The parallels between these revolutions start with their power to topple hierarchies. Martin Luther's 95 Theses, printed and scattered across Germany in 1517, went viral centuries before the term existed. Within months, ordinary people were debating church corruption over tavern tables, armed with pamphlets they could finally read themselves. Twitter, in its early idealistic phase, played a similar role during the Arab Spring. Egyptian activists coordinating Tahrir Square protests under hashtags while state TV broadcast regime propaganda. Both tools flattened communication, letting outsiders bypass traditional power structures. A 16th century farmer could now access scripture without a priest's interpretation, just as a 21st century dissident could broadcast police brutality without corporate media filters. But here's where the comparison turns ominous. The same presses that spread Luther's reforms also circulated the Malleus Maleficarum, a witch-hunting manual that fueled centuries of persecution. Gutenberg's invention birthed both scientific journals and anti-Semitic screeds. Social media follows this same fractured path. One thread might share peer-reviewed climate data, while another amplifies QAnon conspiracy theories. The mechanics of virality haven't changed much either. Luther's team mastered clickbait with woodcut illustrations of the Pope as a donkey-headed monster, just as modern influencers use outrage algorithms to monetize engagement. What took months in 1520 now takes minutes, but the human appetite for sensationalism remains unchanged. The fallout patterns mirror each other with eerie precision. After Luther's movement fragmented into warring sects, the 30 Years' War devastated Europe, a cautionary tale about what happens when consensus reality splinters. Today's epistemic crisis, where flat earthers and vaccine skeptics inhabit parallel digital universes, suggests we're living through a softer version of the same collapse. The Catholic Church responded to the printing press with censorship indexes and propaganda campaigns. Modern governments grapple with Facebook takedowns and bot farms. Both eras reveal an uncomfortable truth. When information is weaponized, the cure often mimics the disease. Yet hidden in this chaos lies the transformative potential both technologies share. The printing press didn't just disrupt, it enabled enlightenment, universal literacy, and eventually democracy. Early social media did something equally radical. It gave voice to the voiceless, from Ferguson protesters to Me Too survivors. The key difference: Gutenberg's disruption unfolded over generations, allowing societies to adapt. Twitter's impact hit like a meteor strike, leaving institutions scrambling to process truths and lies at the speed of memes. Perhaps the real lesson isn't about the tools themselves, but about how slowly human cognition evolves compared to the technologies we create. The printing press forced Europe to invent fact-checking. Now we're relearning that skill for the digital age, only this time the stakes are global and the clock ticks faster. The warriors hidden inside the Trojan horse didn't need a battering ram. They exploited something far more powerful: trust. For 10 long years, the Greeks had failed to breach Troy's walls with force. But when they left a gift at the gates, a towering wooden horse supposedly offering peace, the Trojans rolled it right into their heartland, unaware it carried enemy soldiers in its belly. Cut to 2,000 years later, and modern hackers are still using the same playbook. Only now the horses are digital, the soldiers are lines of code, and the gates they slip through are firewalls and software updates. The names and tools have changed, but the essence of warfare's oldest trick remains identical: exploit trust to bypass defenses. Take Stuxnet, the cyberworm that silently infiltrated Iran's nuclear facilities in 2010. Like the Greeks pretending to sail away, Stuxnet disguised itself as harmless software updates, slipping past security checks. Once inside, it didn't smash centrifuges with hammers. It reprogrammed them to self-destruct while displaying normal readings to operators. This wasn't just hacking, it was psychological warfare, mirroring the Trojan horse's cruel genius. The Iranians, like the Trojans, never saw the threat until it was too late, because they'd been conditioned to trust their own systems. The parallels run deeper than tactics. They reveal a chilling truth about human nature. Troy fell because its guards ignored warnings from Cassandra, the princess cursed with foresight no one believed. Modern cyberattacks succeed for the same reason: employees clicking phishing links despite training, or IT teams dismissing unusual network activity as glitches. Social engineering, whether in ancient sieges or corporate espionage, preys on our innate desire to believe the best. A forged email from a trusted colleague or a USB drive accidentally left in a parking lot. These are just digital versions of the Greeks' wooden offering. Yet there's one key difference that makes today's threats even more insidious. The Trojan horse was a one-time trick. Once discovered, the tactic lost its power. Cyber decoys, by contrast, can be endlessly reproduced and customized. Hackers clone legitimate websites down to the pixel, mimic official government domains with a single swapped letter, or even use deepfake audio to impersonate CEOs authorizing fraudulent transfers. The scale is unimaginable to ancient strategists. A single zero-day exploit can compromise millions of devices globally before patches are developed. Troy's downfall was localized. A modern cyber horse can unleash chaos across continents in seconds. What connects these eras isn't just the methods, it's the arms race they spark. After Troy, civilizations built gates with tighter security and deeper moats. Today, cybersecurity firms develop AI that scrutinizes network traffic for anomalies, while hackers counter with AI-generated malware that evolves in real time. The irony: the more sophisticated defenses become, the more attackers revert to the oldest trick in the book: human manipulation. Even now, over 70% of breaches start not with technical flaws, but with someone being deceived into opening a door. The lesson etched in these two stories isn't about technology, it's about the unchanging weak point in every system. Walls and firewalls will always be vulnerable to one thing: our willingness to believe the gift isn't a weapon in disguise. From Troy to Tehran, the greatest threats aren't the ones we see coming, but the ones we welcome inside. the autumn of 1918 should have been a time of relief. World War I was ending, and cities began lifting the mask mandates and gathering bans imposed during the Spanish flu's first wave. But instead of celebration, what followed was death on an unimaginable scale. The second wave of the pandemic that September became the deadliest in history, killing more in 10 weeks than the Black Plague did in a decade. Fast forward to 2021, and the scene repeated with eerie precision. Just as Delta variant cases surged, governors prematurely declared victory over COVID, rolling back restrictions in a wave of reopening celebrations. In both pandemics, humanity made the exact same catastrophic mistake, confusing the lull between waves for the end of the storm. Public fatigue played the same destructive role in both eras. By fall 1918, war-weary populations had spent years under rationing and propaganda. When officials urged continued flu precautions, newspapers mocked them. Philadelphia's health commissioner was ridiculed as the masked bogeyman for warning against a massive Liberty Loan parade. The city ignored him, packing 200,000 people shoulder to shoulder along Broad Street. Within 72 hours, every hospital bed was full. Within 6 weeks, 12,000 were dead. That same exhaustion resurfaced a century later with mask burnout, as protests erupted against COVID restrictions from Berlin to Texas. The psychology was identical. After enduring isolation and disruption, people clung to any sign of normalcy, even when the data screamed otherwise. Authorities in both pandemics fueled false optimism with mixed messaging. During the Spanish flu, some U.S. surgeons general downplayed risks to maintain wartime morale, while others begged for lockdowns. This confusion created what historians call the truth gap, a vacuum where rumors thrived. COVID saw the same deadly dissonance, politicians promising 15 days to slow the spread, stretched into years, while contradictory guidance on masks and surface transmission eroded trust. In 1918, San Francisco's health board assured citizens the flu was nothing more or less than la grippe, a mild seasonal illness. In 2020, similar reassurances about COVID being just like the flu cost precious weeks of preparedness. Both pandemics proved that uncertainty kills faster than any virus, yet the cruelest parallel lies in who suffered most. During the Spanish flu's second wave, mortality spiked among young adults, an anomaly later attributed to cytokine storms, where healthy immune systems overreacted. COVID Delta variant similarly targeted younger, unvaccinated populations, filling ICUs with 30-year-olds gasping for air. Both outbreaks exposed the fallacy that pandemics only threaten the elderly or frail, revealing how novel viruses can rewrite the rules of vulnerability overnight. The cyclical nature of outbreaks adds another layer of grim familiarity. Spanish flu cases dipped each summer, prompting premature declarations of victory, only to roar back each fall. COVID followed the same stop-start rhythm, with every wave's end breeding complacency until the next variant emerged. Historians note that 1918's third wave, though less deadly, still killed millions because societies dropped their guard entirely. Modern parallels loom as countries dismantle surveillance systems while new Omicron subvariants evolve. The lesson isn't just about viruses, it's about how short human memory is when faced with invisible threats. But buried in this tragic repetition is a sliver of progress. In 1918, there were no vaccines or antivirals, just gauze masks and isolation. Today's mRNA shots, developed in record time, saved an estimated 20 million lives in 2021 alone. The difference: science finally outpaced the virus's mutations, but only where embraced. Herein lies history's sharpest warning: tools mean nothing without collective will. The Spanish flu's second wave wasn't inevitable, it was the result of choices. A century later, we had more knowledge, better technology, and yet made the same mistakes. Pandemics don't just test our medicine, they test our ability to learn. The East India Company didn't just trade spices and silk, it raised armies, minted currency, and toppled kingdoms, operating with a level of power that would make today's tech giants blush. Chartered in 1600, this corporate behemoth wasn't merely a business. It was a shadow empire governing millions in India while answering only to shareholders in London. Fast forward 4 centuries and the playbook hasn't changed, only the players. Modern multinationals like Amazon and Apple may not field private militaries yet, but their influence over governments and workers reveals the same unsettling truth. When corporations grow beyond commercial scale, they don't just compete with states, they start behaving like them. Start with the sheer scale of control. The East India Company collected taxes from Indian peasants, operated its own courts, and even declared wars, all under the thin veneer of a trading enterprise. Its 19,000 private soldiers outnumbered the British Army at the time. Today, corporate power wears a suit instead of a uniform, but the mechanisms are eerily similar. Amazon's dominance over online retail gives it de facto authority to set prices across entire industries, while its lobbying budget rivals that of small nations. Apple's supply chain decisions can uplift or devastate regional economies overnight, just as the company's cotton demands reshaped Indian agriculture. The difference: colonial charters granted monopoly rights explicitly. Modern corporations achieve them through algorithms and acquisitions. The exploitation of labor bridges these eras with disturbing clarity. The company's infamous Indigo revolts saw Indian farmers whipped for refusing to grow cash crops instead of food, a precursor to modern sweatshops where workers faint from exhaustion assembling smartphones. Both systems rely on the same economic coercion: desperate populations with no alternatives. In 18th century Bengal, weavers had their thumbs cut off to prevent them from selling to competitors. In 21st century warehouses, employees wear biometric monitors tracking bathroom breaks. The tools of control evolved from brute force to surveillance tech, but the goal remains unchanged: maximize profit by minimizing agency. Political capture follows the same blueprint. The company bribed British parliamentarians with loans and gifts, securing favorable trade policies that fueled its monopoly. Today's corporate lobbying is more polished. Think golf retreats and PSC donations, but the outcome mirrors history. When a single tech firm can spend $200 million annually on Washington influence, or when oil companies delay climate action despite scientific consensus, we're watching a modern version of the company's opium trade debates: profits prioritized over people under the guise of free enterprise. Yet the most insidious parallel lies in the narrative control. The East India Company framed its plunder as a civilizing mission, just as modern corporations rebrand exploitation as opportunity. Indian famines were blamed on local inefficiency while company agents exported grain. Today, gig economy precarity gets spun as flexibility, and union busting becomes employee choice. The language sanitizes the reality: power consolidated at the top, vulnerability spread at the bottom. But here's where the stories diverge and offer a glimmer of hope. The company's unchecked power eventually triggered its own downfall. Public outrage over its abuses led to the Government of India Act in 1858 dissolving its rule. Modern corporations face similar reckonings. Antitrust lawsuits, worker uprisings, and consumer backlashes signal that unchecked corporate sovereignty still has limits. History's lesson isn't that corporations are inherently evil, it's that power, left unaccountable, always follows the same corrosive path. The real question is whether we'll wait for another Bengal famine before demanding change. The ticker tape frenzy of the 1920s wasn't just about making money. It was a cultural fever dream where shoeshine boys and stenographers poured life savings into soaring stocks, convinced the party would never end. The Dow Jones tripled in 8 years, fueled by margin loans that let investors borrow 90% of a stock's price. Sound familiar? Swap ticker tapes for Robinhood notifications. replace steel stocks with GameStop shares, and you've got the 2021 meme stock explosion, another speculative mania where amateurs rewrote Wall Street's rules before reality came crashing down. At first glance, the parallels seem uncanny. In 1929, radio stations broadcast stock tips to the masses, demystifying finance for everyday Americans. A century later, TikTok and Reddit's Wall Street Bets forum did the same, turning phrases like short squeeze and diamond hands into household slang. Both eras saw ordinary people, armed with new tools and a disdain for elites, upend traditional markets. The flappers of finance in the 20s were replaced by millennials in sweatpants, both convinced they'd cracked the code to easy wealth. Even the celebrities got in on the action. Charlie Chaplin invested alongside his fans in the 20s, just as Elon Musk's tweets sent crypto and stocks spiraling 100 years later. But the real echo lies in the mechanics of mania. The 20s pool operators manipulated prices by artificially inflating demand, then dumping shares on unsuspecting buyers. Modern hedge funds played the same game, with GameStop shorting 140% of its float, betting it would collapse. What they didn't anticipate was Reddit's retail traders spotting the vulnerability and piling in, driving the stock from $19 to $347 in weeks. Both episodes reveal a timeless truth. Markets aren't rational machines, they're battlegrounds where hype and herd mentality can outmuscle fundamentals. The fallout patterns are even more striking. The 20s crash didn't just wipe out paper fortunes, it exposed systemic rot. Banks had lent recklessly, regulators looked away, and when margin calls hit, the contagion spread like wildfire. The meme stock saga, while smaller in scale, laid bare similar cracks. Trading apps gamified investing with confetti animations, while payment for order flow obscured hidden costs. Both eras ended with congressional hearings, scapegoating, and promises of reform, yet the underlying psychology remained unchanged. Yet there's a crucial difference this time around. The 29 crash left disillusionment so deep, it took a generation for retail investors to return. The meme stock aftermath, a shrug, then a pivot to crypto, NFT, and the next shiny thing. The internet didn't just accelerate speculation, it normalized volatility as entertainment, turning the market into a rolling casino where the house always wins. The 20s taught us that euphoria never lasts. The 2020s added a new lesson. In the age of infinite information, forgetting is now optional, but learning still is. When concrete slabs sliced through Berlin in 1961, they didn't just divide a city, they cleaved the world into ideological camps. The Berlin Wall was more than barbed wire and guard towers. It was a physical manifestation of information control, where East German border guards had shoot to kill orders for anyone daring to cross for Western broadcasts or books. Today, the walls are invisible, but the divides are just as stark, not of bricks and mortar, but of firewalls and algorithms that dictate what billions can see, hear, and believe. Whether it's state-sponsored censorship or Silicon Valley's content moderation, the battle over who controls the flow of ideas has simply traded checkpoints for click-through rates. Look at the methods and the parallels tighten. East Germany's Stasi police meticulously intercepted letters, tapped phones, and planted informants to suppress dissent. Modern digital surveillance operates on the same principle, just exponentially more efficient. China's Great Firewall doesn't need soldiers patrolling cyber borders. It uses deep packet inspection to block VPNs and keyword filters to erase Tiananmen Square references from social feeds. Even democracies employ subtler versions, shadow banning, algorithmic throttling, and community guidelines that quietly shape discourse. The tools have evolved from wiretaps to AI, but the goal remains unchanged: to curate reality by controlling access. Propaganda machines adapted with eerie precision. East Germans grew up with actual camera, state TV's nightly broadcasts painting the West as a dystopia of unemployment and crime. Now, troll farms and bot networks flood timelines with manipulated narratives, whether Russian disinformation about Ukrainian biolabs or partisan echo chambers that reduce complex issues to memes. The psychological playbook is identical. Repetition breeds familiarity, familiarity breeds acceptance. What Pravda did with printing presses, Cambridge Analytica achieved with Facebook's psychographic targeting both weaponized confirmation bias to make believers out of skeptics. Yet the most insidious shift lies in self-reinforcement. The Berlin Wall's architects had to actively jam radio signals like RIAs, which beamed uncensored news across the Iron Curtain. Today's digital borders require no such effort. Personalized algorithms do the work automatically, feeding users content that aligns with their existing views. East Germans knew they were being censored. Instagram users scrolling customized feeds rarely question why opposing viewpoints vanish. This passive curation creates what scholars call algorithmic authoritarianism, a system where control feels organic, even comforting, because it mirrors our desires back to us. But here's where the comparison offers a glimmer of hope. The Berlin Wall fell in part because smuggled cassette tapes of Western music and samizdat photocopies of banned books kept alternative narratives alive. Modern censorship battles reveal similar cracks. Activists use mesh networks to bypass internet shutdowns or encode protest messages in blockchain transactions. The lesson isn't that control is absolute. It's that humans have always found ways to tunnel under walls, whether they're made of concrete or code. The real danger isn't the barriers themselves, but forgetting they exist at all. The plague doctors of medieval Europe looked like something out of a nightmare: long leather coats, glass-covered eyes, and most chilling of all, those haunting beaked masks stuffed with fragrant herbs. They believed the stench of disease could be warded off by stronger smells, so those grotesque beaks were packed with lavender, cloves, and even decaying sponges soaked in vinegar. Fast forward to 2020, and you'll find eerily similar figures strolling through COVID wards, not in leather, but in shimmering hazmat suits, their faces hidden behind fogged-up goggles and N95 respirators. The costumes have changed, but the primal fear behind them hasn't. Whether it's the Black Death or coronavirus, when invisible killers stalk the streets, humanity's first instinct is always the same: armor up, no matter how strange the armor looks. Dig deeper, and the parallels between these two eras of protective gear reveal a fascinating dance between science and superstition. Plague doctors filled their beaks with herbs because the dominant medical theory, miasma, claimed foul air spread disease. They weren't entirely wrong. We now know poor sanitation attracts disease-carrying rats and fleas. Their masks, though misguided, recognized airborne threats centuries before germ theory. Modern PPE operates on that same principle of barrier protection, just with vastly better data. A hazmat suit's impermeable fabric and sealed seams would seem like sorcery to a 17th century physician, yet both designs share the same goal: keeping the outside world from seeping in. What's truly striking is how both outfits became symbols far beyond their practical use. The plague doctor's mask morphed into a cultural shorthand for death itself, appearing in carnival costumes and horror films. Similarly, the sight of healthcare workers in head-to-toe PPE became the defining image of the COVID era. Their ghostly outlines framed in ICU windows a reminder of the fragility separating safety from catastrophe. Both designs transcended their medical purpose to embody the anxieties of their ages, yet the differences highlight how far we've come and how much remains unchanged. Those herb-stuffed beaks offered almost no real protection against bubonic plague, while modern suits, when properly used, can block 99% of viral particles. But just as plague doctors sometimes removed their masks to comfort the dying, knowing full well the risk, today's nurses still leaned in, faces raw from masks, to hold iPads for final goodbyes. The gear evolves, but the bravery beneath it doesn't. Perhaps the most haunting echo lies in the desperation that spawned both designs. During the Great Plague of London, charlatans sold anti-pestilence amulets alongside legitimate remedies preying on fear. Sound familiar? COVID saw a similar market explosion, from ultraviolet disinfection wands to counterfeit respirators flooding online marketplaces. Both eras prove that when panic spreads faster than pathogens, people will cling to anything that feels like control, whether it's a leather beak or an untested herbal remedy. But here's where the stories diverge in a way that matters. The plague doctors' costumes were based on the best science of their time, flawed but earnest. Today, we have the tools to protect ourselves with precision, yet misinformation still convinces some to reject masks entirely. The real lesson isn't about the gear, it's about the human tendency to distrust expertise when fear takes the wheel. The beaked masks of the past were a dead end. The hazmat suits of today, they're just the latest chapter in an endless war against the unseen, one where knowledge, not superstition, is the only weapon that ever really saves us. The streets of London in 1913 echoed with the sound of shattering glass as Emmeline Pankhurst's suffragettes hurled stones through government windows, one desperate act in a decades-long battle for the vote. Fast forward a century, and the same defiant energy pulsed through social media feeds as #MeToo survivors typed two words that would shake industries to their core. Though separated by time and tactics, these movements share the same burning core: the demand for women to exist as equals in spaces designed to exclude them. The suffragettes chained themselves to railings, modern activists weaponized hashtags, yet both faced the same scorn, the same accusations of hysteria, and the same slow grind of progress that defines every fight for gender justice. Consider the backlash both movements endured. When suffragettes staged hunger strikes in prison, authorities force-fed them through rubber tubes, a brutal tactic framed as protection from self-harm. When #MeToo went viral, critics dismissed it as a witch hunt, portraying accused men as the real victims. The playbook hasn't changed: silence dissent by framing demands for equality as dangerous extremism. Even the language of ridicule carries echoes. Cartoons in 1910 depicted suffragettes as ugly, unhinged spinsters. Modern memes reduce feminists to blue-haired SJWs. The goal is identical: delegitimize the messenger to avoid confronting the message. Yet the parallels in perseverance are just as striking. Suffragettes like Emily Davison martyred themselves, literally stepping in front of the king's horse at the Derby, to force the world to pay attention. #MeToo survivors risked careers and reputations to share stories of assault, knowing the odds of justice were slim. Both movements turned personal pain into collective power, leveraging spectacle in an era's most effective medium: suffrage pamphlets in the age of print, viral threads in the age of algorithms. The suffrage anthem, Bread and Roses, demanded both sustenance and dignity. #MeToo's rallying cry sought not just punishment for abusers, but systemic change to prevent harm. The incremental victories reveal another sobering parallel. Britain granted limited voting rights to certain women over 30 in 1918, a compromise that excluded working-class women and required another decade of struggle for full equality. Similarly, #MeToo's early wins, high-profile firings, policy changes masked how much remained unchanged. NDAs still silence victims, and most survivors never see their day in court. Progress in gender justice has always been a game of inches, with every step forward met with fierce resistance. What makes these movements truly transformative, though, is how they redefine power structures. The suffragettes didn't just want the vote, they challenged the idea that political participation was inherently male. #MeToo wasn't just about punishing predators. It exposed how workplaces function as old boys' clubs where harassment is the price of admission. Both forced societies to confront uncomfortable truths. That equality isn't a gift to be granted, but a right to be seized. Yet the most telling difference lies in scale. The suffragettes fought for a single, tangible goal, the ballot, while Hashmi take on a hydra-headed monster of cultural norms, corporate complicity, and legal loopholes. This reflects a brutal truth: the further marginalized groups climb toward equality, the more insidious the remaining barriers become. The vote was a door. Hashmi too revealed the maze behind it. But here's where history offers hope. Each wave of feminism builds on the last, not replacing but expanding the fight. Suffragettes broke the first barrier. Hashmi too activists walk through it, demanding the rooms beyond be rebuilt entirely. The chants change, deeds, not words, becomes believe women, but the heartbeat remains the same. Dignity isn't negotiable. And if the past teaches us anything, it's that even the sturdiest walls crack when enough voices press against them. Picture this: in the winter of 1637, a single tulip bulb in Holland traded for 10 times a skilled craftsman's annual salary. Not fields of flowers, just one bulb for the fleeting promise of future blooms. The buyers weren't gardeners, they were speculators caught in a frenzy so intense they traded farms for flora. Now swipe forward 4 centuries and the scene repeats, only this time the commodity isn't rooted in soil but in blockchain, NFT, digital tokens hawked as the next revolution in art ownership. The players wear hoodies instead of starched collars, but the feverish glint in their eyes, that hasn't changed one bit. At their peak, tulip contracts in Amsterdam taverns changed hands 10 times in a day, each flip inflating prices further. Sound familiar? The NFT boom of 2021 followed the same script. A Bored Ape cartoon selling for $2.9 million, a pixelated CryptoPunk fetching $11.8 million. Both bubbles thrived on the same combustible mix: scarcity, real or manufactured, social proof, your neighbor getting rich, and sheer FOMO. The Dutch traded bulbs they'd never plant. Crypto enthusiasts bought JPEG anyone could right-click and save. The value wasn't in the object, it was in the collective belief that someone else would pay more tomorrow. The mechanisms of mania reveal even darker parallels. Tulip traders used wind trading, buying bulbs still in the ground with IOUs, a 17th century version of leverage that spiraled out of control. NFT, too, were fueled by speculative debt, with buyers taking out crypto loans to ape into the next hype drop. When the tulip market collapsed in February 1637, it wasn't because the flowers lost their beauty, it was because the credit system propping up trades snapped. The NFT crash of 2022 played out identically. As crypto lending platforms like Celsius imploded, liquidity vanished, and suddenly, no one wanted that 10 Ethereum monkey picture anymore. Yet the aftermaths diverge in telling ways. Tulip mania left no lasting cultural footprint, just cautionary tales and a few still life paintings. NFT, by contrast, embedded themselves in the art world despite the crash. Institutions like Christie's now host NFT auctions, and digital creators leverage smart contracts for royalties, a structural shift the tulip trades never achieved. Here's why: NFT, for all their absurd valuations, solved a real problem, proving digital ownership in a way tulips never could. No one needed blockchain to verify a flower. The bubble popped, but the underlying technology found utility, much like how the dot-com crash didn't erase the internet's potential. What binds these episodes across centuries isn't just greed, it's the human tendency to confuse novelty for inevitability. Dutch merchants genuinely believed tulip prices would climb forever because Portugal might stop importing bulbs. NFT true believers argued digital art was the future because, well, the future was digital. Both groups mistook a speculative frenzy for a paradigm shift. The lesson isn't that innovation is worthless, it's that when people start mortgaging houses to buy speculative assets, the smart money isn't joining the rush. It's waiting for the crash. History's real warning lies in who got hurt. Tulip mania's biggest losers weren't wealthy merchants but small-time tradesmen who bet their life savings. Similarly, the NFT crash didn't bankrupt CryptoPunk whales. It wiped out retail investors lured by influencers promising generational wealth. Both eras prove speculative bubbles function like pyramid schemes. Early entrants profit, latecomers get crushed, and the architects walk away unscathed. But here's the twist that redeems this cycle of madness. Every bubble leaves behind something valuable. The Dutch Golden Age's economic resilience post-tulip helped fund Rembrandt's masterpieces. The NFT craze, despite its excesses, forced mainstream conversation about digital ownership, a debate that will outlast even the silliest ape JPEG. The pattern isn't just boom and bust, it's boom, bust, and slow, painful progress. The next time someone claims this time it's different, remember, it never is. But sometimes in the wreckage we salvage tools to build something better. Etched in a towering slab of basalt nearly 4,000 years ago, the Code of Hammurabi proclaimed a revolutionary idea. Justice should be written in stone, not left to the whims of rulers. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. These stark prescriptions from ancient Babylon aim to replace tribal vengeance with standardized punishments. Now, fast forward to 2024, where another seemingly impartial system promises fairness: artificial intelligence. From predictive policing algorithms to automated loan approvals, we've entrusted machines with decisions once reserved for judges and elders. But beneath the surface, these two systems, one carved in rock, the other coded in silicon, reveal the same timeless struggle. Can rules, no matter how precise, ever account for the messy complexities of human lives? Start with the illusion of objectivity. Hammurabi's laws assigned fixed penalties based on rigid social hierarchies. A noble's life was worth more than a commoner's, a man's more than a woman's. The code claimed fairness because it treated equal cases equally, but its biases were baked into the framework. Modern algorithms harbor similar ghosts in the machine. A landmark 2016 ProPublica investigation exposed how Compass, a risk assessment tool used in U.S. courts, falsely flagged black defendants as future criminals at twice the rate of white defendants. Both systems mask subjectivity beneath a veneer of neutrality, proving that fairness isn't just about consistent application, it's about who writes the rules in the first place. The parallels deepen when you examine enforcement. Babylonian judges applied Hammurabi's code with limited discretion, much like how AI systems today operate as black boxes. Their decision-making processes opaque even to their creators. Take hiring algorithms. Amazon scrapped an AI recruiting tool in 2018 after discovering it downgraded resumes containing the word women's, as in women's chess club. The algorithm didn't hate women, it simply mirrored patterns in historical hiring data where men dominated tech roles. Hammurabi's judges, too, reinforced societal norms without questioning their validity. Both eras confuse precedent for justice, mistaking the way things are for the way things ought to be. Yet the crucial difference lies in scale and speed. A flawed human judge might mishandle dozens of cases in a lifetime. A biased algorithm can distort millions of decisions in minutes. When an AI-driven healthcare system in 2019 prioritized healthier patients over sicker ones for hospital beds because it equated easier to treat with more deserving, it exposed a chilling reality. Code lacks the capacity for mercy. Hammurabi's laws at least allowed for communal judgment in the city gates. Algorithms render verdicts without context, reducing lives to data points. What both systems ultimately reveal is the myth of pure objectivity. The Babylonian scribes who chiseled the code were steeped in their culture's biases, just as the engineers training today's AI inherit the prejudices of their datasets. True justice has always required something neither stone tablets nor neural networks can provide: empathy. The challenge isn't abandoning rules for chaos, it's recognizing that fairness demands constant scrutiny, whether you're decoding cuneiform or debugging Python. After 4 millennia, we're still wrestling with the same question: can any system, ancient or algorithmic, truly be just if it doesn't see people as more than the sum of their categories. The backwoods distilleries of western Pennsylvania in 1794 weren't just producing whiskey, they were brewing rebellion. When federal agents rode into the frontier demanding taxes on every gallon of spirits, farmers who relied on liquor as currency and trade good met them with rifles and torches. This wasn't just about money, it was a clash over who had the right to control livelihoods in a fledgling nation. Fast forward to 2023, and the same battle plays out in crypto forums and libertarian podcasts, where modern anti-tax activists rally against IRS surveillance of digital wallets. The frontier may have shifted from the Allegheny Mountains to the blockchain, but the core argument remains unchanged. Where does legitimate taxation end and government overreach begin? The whiskey rebellion erupted because frontier farmers faced an impossible equation. Grain was too bulky to transport profitably across the Appalachians, so distilling it into alcohol was the only viable way to bring crops to market. Alexander Hamilton's whiskey tax up to 25% of a gallon's value felt like a direct attack on survival. Today's crypto-libertarians voice nearly identical grievances. Like 18th-century moonshiners converting corn into liquid assets, they see Bitcoin as a way to opt out of inflationary fiat systems. When regulators demand capital gains taxes on NFT sales or DeFi transactions, it's not just paperwork, it's perceived as an existential threat to what they view as economic self-determination. Enforcement tactics then and now reveal another eerie parallel. President Washington dispatched 13,000 militiamen to crush the whiskey rebels, a show of force meant to prove the federal government's authority. Modern equivalents play out through subpoenas to Coinbase or the seizure of Silk Road's Bitcoin trove. Yet just as frontier distillers simply moved operations deeper into the wilderness, today's crypto tax resistors migrate to privacy coins like Monero or decentralized exchanges with no KYC protocols. The cat-and-mouse game between revenue collectors and those evading them hasn't changed only the terrain from mountain hollows to encrypted networks. But the most revealing comparison lies in the rhetoric. Whiskey rebels framed their struggle as a continuation of the American Revolution, painting tax collectors as revenuers no better than British redcoats. Modern anti-tax movements deploy the same revolutionary imagery, with Bitcoin maximalists quoting Thomas Paine and comparing IRS audits to the intolerable acts. Both movements tap into a deeply American tension between collective responsibility and individual liberty, the same friction that birthed the Boston Tea Party. Where these rebellions diverge is in their outcomes. The Whiskey Rebellion's suppression cemented federal authority, setting a precedent that would enable everything from New Deal programs to Medicare. Crypto's resistance, by contrast, exists in a legal gray zone. Governments are still scrambling to regulate an asset class that's borderless by design. One lesson, though, transcends both eras. Taxation isn't just about funding governments. It's a referendum on what kind of society we're willing to pay for and who gets to decide the price. Pompeii's ruins stand frozen in time, not just as a relic of disaster, but as a mirror to our own willful blindness. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD, the city wasn't caught entirely off guard. Earthquakes had rattled the region for years, and sulfurous fumes hung in the air days before the cataclysm. Yet life carried on. Bakers baked, merchants haggled, and officials dismissed the tremors as minor nuisances. Sound familiar? Today's climate warnings, rising seas, megafires, dying coral reef, saw our modern-day tremors dismissed with the same misplaced optimism that doomed Pompeii's citizens. The difference, their threat was one mountain, ours is an entire planet. The parallels between Pompeii's demise and our current inertia are almost too precise to ignore. Roman accounts describe strange animal behavior before the eruption. Dogs howled. Birds fled, signs we now recognize as nature's red flags, today's equivalent. The Arctic permafrost thawing at record speeds or migratory patterns shifting decades ahead of projections. Just as Pompeians misinterpreted their warnings, we've spun climate anomalies into political debates rather than survival imperatives. Even the class divisions echo across millennia. Wealthy Pompeians had villas on higher ground, while the poor crowded in the ash's direct path. Modern billionaires build bunkers in New Zealand while coastal slums drown in king tides. History's cruel punchline: privilege buys time but rarely escape. What makes Pompeii especially haunting is the evidence of last-minute panic. Archaeologists find bodies clutching jewelry, as if wealth could shield them from pyroclastic flow. Our version: corporate pledges to go carbon neutral by 2050 while doubling down on oil exploration next quarter. The cognitive dissonance is identical, preparing for disaster without changing the behaviors that guarantee it. Even the technology gap collapses under scrutiny. Romans lacked seismographs. We've had climate models since the 1960s, when Exxon scientists privately warned executives of looming catastrophe. The knowledge existed then, as it did in Pompeii's final hours. The fatal flaw wasn't ignorance, it was the refusal to act until the sky was literally falling. Yet buried in Pompeii's ashes is a glimmer of hope. The same volcanic layer that entombed the city preserved it, offering later generations an unparalleled snapshot of Roman life. Our climate legacy could mirror this paradox. The very forces that threaten us also document our choices with brutal clarity. Ice cores will show the moment CO2 spiked, sediment layers will reveal the microplastics we buried, and future archaeologists may puzzle over why we kept expanding airports as wildfires raged. Pompeii's tragedy wasn't just its destruction, it was the preventable blindness that led there. Our saving grace: unlike the Romans, we still have time to read the warnings written not in tremors but in data. The question is whether we'll heed them before our cities, too, become cautionary tales sealed in geological strata. In 1947, Secretary of State George Marshall stood before Harvard's graduating class and unveiled a radical idea not just to help Europe rebuild after World War II, but to ensure its devastation never happened again. The Marshall Plan would pump $13 billion, over $150 billion in today's money, into reconstructing factories, railways, and democracies across the continent. Fast forward 75 years and another colossal infrastructure project snakes across continents, but with a distinctly different blueprint: China's Belt and Road Initiative. Both initiatives claim to foster development and connectivity, yet their underlying strategies reveal how aid has always been a double-edged tool, one that builds bridges while quietly shifting the balance of power. The Marshall Plan's genius lay in its transparency. America openly acknowledged its motives: stabilizing Europe to prevent communist takeover, yes, but also creating markets for U.S. goods and cementing NATO alliances. The funds came with strings. Recipients had to cooperate economically and adopt democratic reforms, but these conditions were debated in parliaments, not dictated in backrooms. Contrast this with Belt and Road's murkier negotiations. From Sri Lanka to Zambia, Chinese loans for ports and highways have saddled nations with debt they couldn't repay, leading to controversial asset seizures. When Sri Lanka handed over Hambantota port on a 99-year lease after defaulting, it wasn't just a financial transaction. It was a lesson in how infrastructure can become geopolitical leverage. The scale of these endeavors reveals another stark divide. The Marshall Plan focused on war-torn allies, prioritizing industrial revival in Britain, France, and West Germany. Belt and Road, by contrast, targets the global South, regions long ignored by Western investors, where a new highway or power plant can buy loyalty overnight. Pakistan's Gwadar port, funded by China, gives Beijing direct access to the Arabian Sea, just as Marshall Plan railways strengthened U.S. trade routes. The difference: post-war Europe had the institutions to absorb aid without losing sovereignty. many Belt and Road partners lack that resilience, leaving them vulnerable to what critics call debt trap diplomacy. Yet the most telling parallel lies in the cultural exports bundled with concrete and steel. Marshall Plan shipments included not just tractors but jazz records and Hollywood films, subtly exporting American values alongside commodities. China's Confucius Institutes and Huawei tech packages serve a similar role, soft power wrapped in hard infrastructure. Both superpowers understood that roads and ports aren't just conduits for goods, they're channels for influence. A highway built with U.S. dollars in 1950 became a route for Ford trucks and Coca-Cola. A fiber optic network laid by Chinese engineers today carries surveillance tech and Alibaba's e-commerce platforms. The legacy of these programs hinges on a single question: who benefits most? The Marshall Plan's recipients emerged as thriving democracies with mixed economies, their rebirth arguably serving U.S. interests but also their own. Belt and Roads outcomes remain uncertain. While some nations gain vital infrastructure, others risk becoming client states in a new imperial shadow. The lesson isn't that aid is inherently exploitative, it's that true development can't be measured in miles of railroad alone. Whether wrapped in the stars and stripes or the five-starred red flag, the test of any aid program is whether it leaves recipients freer than it found them, or merely swaps one dependency for another. When Captain Alfred Dreyfus was stripped of his rank before a jeering Parisian crowd in 1895, his humiliation wasn't just a miscarriage of justice, it was a spectacle designed to appease public fury. Wrongfully convicted of treason based on forged evidence and rampant anti-Semitism, Dreyfus became the original victim of trial by media, his fate sealed not in the courtroom but in the pages of nationalist newspapers like La Libre Parole. Sound familiar? Swap the yellow press of Belle Epoque France for today's viral outrage cycles, and you'll find the same forces at work, public figures crucified not on evidence but on the altar of collective indignation. The mechanics of these modern and historical scandals overlap with disturbing precision. Just as La Libre Parole editor Edouard Drumont stoked anti-Semitic fervor with daily front-page accusations, today's outrage media, whether partisan cable news or algorithmically amplified Twitter storms, reduces complex cases to binary moral fables. Dreyfus was branded a traitor before his trial began. Modern equivalents faced digital mobs that render due process irrelevant. Take the Duke Lacrosse case in 2006, where 3 students were falsely accused of rape, their names dragged through headlines before DNA evidence exonerated them. Or the Boston Marathon bombing manhunt, when Reddit detectives wrongly identified an innocent Brown University student as the suspect, forcing his family into hiding. In each scenario, the rush to judgment outpaced the facts, proving that the court of public opinion has always been where nuance goes to die. What makes the Dreyfus affair especially prescient is how it exposed journalism's dual role as both watchdog and attack dog. Emile Zola's famous J.Accuse letter in 1898 became a landmark defense of truth, shattering the military's cover-up. Yet that same press ecosystem had earlier demonized Dreyfus with equal vigor. Fast forward to 21st century true crime podcasts or documentary series like Making a Murderer, tools that can exonerate the wrongfully convicted or skewer the presumption of innocence depending on who wields them. The platforms have evolved from broadsheets to TikTok threads, but the power imbalance remains. A single viral accusation can destroy a life long before appeals or retractions restore it. Yet the most insidious parallel lies in the social fractures these cases reveal. The Dreyfus affair split France into Dreyfusards and anti-Dreyfusards, pitting intellectuals against nationalists in a culture war that foreshadowed modern political tribalism. Today's media firestorms from #cancel culture debates to COVID origin theories follow the same script. Facts become secondary to ideological alignment. When the New York Times published an op-ed by Senator Tom Cotton calling for military force against protesters in 2020, Staff revolted not because every claim was fact-checked as false, but because it violated their sense of moral order. The Dreyfus lesson echoes here when journalism conflates justice with morality. The truth often gets trampled in the stampede, but buried in this grim pattern is a crucial divergence: speed. The Dreyfus case dragged on for 12 years before exoneration, its resolution playing out in slow-moving court appeals and presidential pardons. Modern scandals unfold at meme velocity. An accusation trends at breakfast, the apology tour airs by dinner. This acceleration has consequences. While Dreyfus's ordeal allowed time for Zola's counter-narrative to gain traction, today's attention spans rarely last long enough for corrections to catch up. The viral cycle doesn't just distort justice, it compresses it into a content window where resolution is less important than engagement metrics. What history whispers through these echoes isn't that public scrutiny is inherently harmful, it's that unchecked, it becomes indistinguishable from mob rule. The anti-Dreyfus press didn't invent French anti-Semitism, it amplified existing prejudices into a national crisis. Similarly, modern outrage algorithms don't create our biases, they supercharge them, turning whispers into wildfire. The real question left by both eras is whether journalism's highest duty is to reflect public sentiment or to challenge it, to feed the crowd or, when necessary, stand against it. Dreyfus's eventual vindication came too late to undo his suffering, but it left a warning etched in history. When media confuses verdicts with vendettas, no one's innocence is safe. When Viking longships first sliced through the North Atlantic's frigid waves around the year 800, their crews weren't just raiding coastal villages. They were laying the groundwork for humanity's oldest and most relentless impulse: expansion. Fast forward 12 centuries, and the same restless energy fuels Elon Musk's SpaceX as it test-fires rockets destined for Mars. The helmets may have swapped horned adornments for visored spacesuits, but the underlying drive remains startlingly similar. Whether it's Eric the Red establishing a foothold in Greenland or Musk plotting a self-sustaining city on the Red Planet, these ventures reveal how little our reasons for pushing boundaries have changed, and how urgently we need to confront the ethical dilemmas baked into every frontier. Start with the parallels in motivation. Viking explorers braved treacherous seas for a mix of necessity and opportunity over population, political exile, and the lure of untouched farmland. Musk frames Mars colonization as a hedge against existential risk, warning that putting all our eggs in one planetary basket could doom humanity. Both narratives blend pragmatism and idealism, but scratch the surface and less noble incentives emerge. The Vikings' settlement of Vinland wasn't just about survival. It involved displacing indigenous Skraelings, just as Martian ambitions risk repeating colonial patterns under the guise of science. When Musk tweets about making Mars a free planet, one wonders, free for whom? The wealthy few who can afford a ticket, or the descendants of those already marginalized by Earth's inequities? The logistical challenges mirror each other with eerie precision. Viking voyages relied on sturdy cargo ships that carried livestock and tools for uncertain lands. SpaceX's Starship fulfills the same role, a vessel designed not just for exploration but for hauling the seeds of civilization. Leif Erikson's crew spent winters in turf houses, huddled around hearths. Musk envisions geodesic domes with nuclear-powered heaters. Both eras grappled with the same question: how much of the old world do you bring, and what must you leave behind? The Vikings learned the hard way that Norse farming techniques failed in Greenland's shorter growing seasons. A cautionary tale for those assuming Earth's agriculture will thrive under Martian radiation. Ethical shadows loom over both epochs. Norse sagas recount violent clashes with indigenous peoples in North America, a history often whitewashed as discovery. Modern space advocates risk similar blind spots when they speak of Mars as a blank slate. ignoring that celestial bodies hold cultural significance for many Earth-bound communities. The Navajo Nation protested NASA Mars rover landing in 2021, arguing it desecrated a sacred landscape. Such objections expose the arrogance of assuming nowhere is sacred until we declare it so, a mindset that fueled terrestrial colonialism and now threatens to infect the stars. Yet the starkest contrast lies in scalability. A Viking raid might displace a village. A corporate space colony could alter an entire planetary ecosystem. Terraforming proposals, like Musk's idea to nuke Mars' poles to release greenhouse gases, raise questions no medieval warlord ever faced. Who gets to decide a planet's fate? The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 forbids national land claims, but it says nothing about private entities turning Mars into a company town. Imagine a future where access to oxygen reserves depends on signing an employment contract with SpaceX, a dystopia that makes feudal lords look benevolent. What history whispers through these parallels isn't that exploration is wrong. It's that every frontier magnifies both our ingenuity and our flaws. The Vikings' legacy includes brutal conquests, but also democratic assemblies and trade networks that connected continents. Musk's Mars dream could democratize space or cement a new era of corporate feudalism. The difference this time, we're aware of the patterns. Whether we break them or not will determine if Mars becomes humanity's next chapter, or just a repeat of our oldest mistakes, written in red dust instead of blood. For centuries, pilgrims climbed the steep slopes of Mount Parnassus, bearing gifts and desperate questions for the Oracle of Delphi. Seated atop her tripod, inhaling ethylene fumes rising from the earth, the Pythia would slip into a trance, uttering cryptic verses that kings and peasants alike interpreted as divine glimpses of destiny. Today, we've swapped sacred caves for server farms, exchanging the Pythia's riddles for algorithmic predictions, yet our hunger to peel back time's curtain remains just as desperate. The Oracle's prophecies and modern data analytics might seem worlds apart, but they're bound by the same human longing to tame life's uncertainty by claiming mastery over the future. Consider how both systems thrive on ambiguity. The Pythia's most famous prediction that King Croesus would destroy a great empire if he attacked Persia was technically accurate, though the empire he destroyed turned out to be his own. Modern predictive models operate on similar wiggle room. When election algorithms give a candidate a 70% chance of winning, that 30% uncertainty hedge allows them to be right regardless of the outcome. Both the Oracle and AI speak in probabilities rather than absolutes, leaving room for interpretation when reality diverges from the forecast. The difference. Delphi's vagueness was theatrical. Our algorithms conceal uncertainty beneath a veneer of mathematical precision, making their flaws harder to spot. The rituals surrounding these prophecies reveal another eerie parallel. Before consulting the Oracle, pilgrims underwent purification rites and sacrificed goat steps believed to ensure accurate visions. Today, we have our own superstitions, cleaning datasets, sanctifying models with peer review, and treating correlation as causation if the p-value is small enough. The Oracle's priests interpreted her babblings for clients, much as data scientists now explain algorithmic outputs to corporate executives. In both eras, intermediaries profit by translating uncertainty into something resembling certainty, whether through poetic couplets or polished PowerPoints. Yet the most striking similarity lies in who bears the blame when predictions fail. The Pythia's missed forecasts were often attributed to the questioner's moral failings or inadequate sacrifices, a convenient way to preserve her divine authority. Modern predictive failures follow the same deflection playbook. When Google flu trends notoriously overestimated influenza cases by 140% in 2013, the blame fell on noisy data, not the model's design. Facial recognition algorithms that misidentify people of color, training set limitations, not the engineers who curated them. Like the Oracle's priests, today's tech architects rarely shoulder responsibility for their system's flaws. They simply demand more data, more iterations, more faith. But here's where the comparison takes a darker turn. Delphi's prophecies, for all their influence, affected only those who sought them. Algorithmic predictions, by contrast, actively shape the futures they claim to foresee. When predictive policing software labels neighborhoods high crime, it justifies increased surveillance, which generates more arrests, reinforcing the algorithm's original bias. Unlike the Oracle's passive riddles, our digital soothsayers create self-fulfilling prophecies on a societal scale. The Pythia never claimed her visions could alter fate. Silicon Valley sells its algorithms as tools to control it. Beneath all this lies a painful truth we've yet to confront. Our obsession with prediction isn't really about accuracy, it's about control. The pilgrims at Delphi and the executives hoarding big data share the same unspoken belief. If they can just decode the future, they might cheat suffering, loss, or failure. The irony, the Oracle's most enduring legacy wasn't her prophecies, but the maxim inscribed at her temple's entrance: know thyself. In the age of AI, that ancient advice might be the one prediction worth trusting. After 3,000 years, we still haven't learned that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only lived. From the stock market crashes of 1929 and 2008 to the eerie parallels between witch trials and cancel culture, these 30 echoes reveal a truth as unsettling as it is undeniable. Humanity keeps replaying the same script, just with different props. The Black Death and COVID showed us how fear spreads faster than any virus, while the East India Company and modern tech giants proved corporate power always overreaches without checks. We watched roads built by Romans and interstates follow identical engineering logic, saw Salem's hysteria resurface in Twitter mobs, and cringed as tulip mania's ghost haunted NFT speculators. Even our rebellions rhyme. Whiskey tax protesters and crypto-libertarians both screamed about tyranny when authorities came collecting. The most chilling lesson isn't that history repeats, it's that we allow it to. Pompeii ignored the tremors before Vesuvius erupted. We dismiss climate warnings while coastlines vanish. The Titanic's engineers swore their ship was unsinkable, just as Boeing's executives dismissed warnings about the 737 MAX. Over and over, the same fatal flaws resurface: arrogance dressed up as innovation, greed masquerading as progress, and the delusion that this time we're too advanced to fail. Yet buried in these cycles is a sliver of hope. The Marshall Plan rebuilt Europe after we nearly destroyed it. Hashmi II proved centuries of oppression can't silence collective outrage forever. History's echoes aren't just warnings, they're blueprints for doing better. The Roman roads still standing today remind us that not all legacies have to be cautionary tales, some can be foundations. So here's the real question: which echo will you amplify? The next time you spot a headline that feels like déjà vu, whether it's a crypto crash, a political scandal, or a revolution brewing, will you dismiss it as just how things are, or recognize the pattern and demand a new ending? Drop your own historical echoes in the comments, and let's see how many more parallels we can uncover, because the past isn't just whispering to us, it's shouting. The only question left is whether we'll finally listen.